Hello and welcome to the Wyoming Tribune Eagle editorial board's interviews with the candidates for Wyoming governor who have challengers in the August 21st primary. We're here with Bill Dahlin, Republican candidate for governor. Thank you, Mr. Dahlin, for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You bet. I'm Brian Martin, the newspaper's managing editor, and I'm here today with Bob Fecht, Jim Weaver, and Rachel Martinez, all community representatives on the editorial board. I'm also here with Katie Cull, a member of our reporting team who will be monitoring the Facebook live feed, and she'll be curating questions from our online audience for questioning toward the end of our hour together. Before we launch into any questions, just a few reminders. Because these interviews are being live streamed, we've provided the editorial board's questions to the candidates in advance so that no one was at a disadvantage for interviewing early in the process. Also, we've asked the candidates to try to limit their answers to each question to 2 minutes in order to get to as many topics as possible and to allow time for our online audience to get their questions in. Finally, in addition to helping Wyoming voters decide who will get their vote later this summer, these interviews will be the basis of the editorial board's recommendations in both the Republican and Democratic primaries. These editorials are currently scheduled to be published in the newspaper in mid-July. That's it for now, so if you're ready, Mr. Dahlin, let's go ahead and get started, shall we?
All right. Well,
So start out with 2 minutes about you and your background, please.
Bill Dahlin, I was born and raised in Sheridan, Wyoming. I grew up there and left as a young man to pursue opportunities like a lot of young people do. And I developed businesses mainly in the Midwest part of the country. I moved back in the year 2000 and have been here ever since. My background in business, I'm the only candidate that sells coal. I'm the only candidate that has extensive background in the rail and transportation sector. I'm the only candidate that bought a defunct coal mine and turned it into a multi-level diversified business. And I could go into that, but 2 minutes won't let me tell you the whole thing right now. Anyway, that's my background. I'm a business guy. My backbone is the same as Wyoming's backbone when it comes to energy and transportation logistics. And I really look forward to working with the people of Wyoming. You know, all of us by ourselves can't accomplish everything on our own. It takes all of us to get what we need to have done. And by the way, there's nothing we can't accomplish, by the way, if we work together.
Why do you want the governor's job?
You know, it's something that I think all of us here should serve our community, our state, our country in whatever fashion we feel suited for. And I feel suited for this job. I don't need to do it. But I want to do it. And I want to do it to work with the people of Wyoming to do something that's never really been done, and that's diversify our economy.
How do you differentiate yourself from your challengers?
First of all, I haven't held any office before, and I'm not a political insider. I think if you look at the other candidates, they have been involved, related to, or heavily involved, or actually have held office before, or ran for office before. So, for starters, I haven't had those qualifications, and it might be a detriment to some people, but I feel like it's an advantage. And I'm a businessman, and that's important to note because I'll look at things differently, and to be fiscally responsible and be creative and innovative in order to survive as a businessman is something very important to bring to the table.
Just really quickly follow up, there are a couple other businessmen in the race. How do you differentiate yourself from them?
Well, take Sam. He works for a company that he didn't create. My companies, I was involved in creating them. Sam didn't create them. Greenhouse Data, he works for them. And I'm not familiar with any company that he specifically created. There's a big difference. I climbed up the corporate ladder. I understand the corporate world, which he's in, but there's a big difference when you start businesses from scratch. When you start them from scratch, it's a whole different challenge. And so the other business people really don't have that type of background in that regard. So there's a big difference.
Mr. Dahlin, what's your vision for the state of Wyoming?
I think it'd be more correct to say it's our vision, not my vision. Wyoming needs to change. We need to look at things differently. And to look at things differently, we need to think differently, we need to do things differently. I'm a coal guy, transportation guy, also have a lot of background that matches the state of Wyoming. Coal is flat. We need to think about different things and how we're going to bring it to the table. Example is industrial hemp, and I bring it up all the time, and people, particularly my colleagues, are probably getting real sick of me talking about it. Industrial hemp can bring rural communities back. It has over 25,000 uses from biodegradable plastics to construction materials, on, and it can grow in Wyoming. It's drought resistant, so it doesn't demand water, and it's something that it's not going to change the world, but it's something to change our thinking so we can actually become diversified at some point. Because if we've never been diversified, we aren't diversified, and we shouldn't be afraid of being diversified. So we got to take things differently and look at things differently. If we don't, then we're going to be talking the same way 4 years from now. So we've got to think differently, and industrial hemp introduces that thought process. Plus, it creates hundreds of jobs and millions of revenue in a short period of time if we open up that door and take down the tripping wires.
If elected, what are your priorities for your first 100 days in office?
Again, I think it should be our priorities, not my priorities, and the fiscal responsibility is a key. Funding is key. Economics touch every single one of us. That's one common denominator that touches every single one of us. And if we look at fiscal responsibility, I'll give you an example. The Highway Patrol has 175 slots in the state of Wyoming. And we need them for our safety. That's a requirement of the governor from a constitutional standpoint. We need them. That's essential. They can only fill 125 of those slots because they don't get paid well, and they have issues within that organization. And that can be said on the ground troops all over the state. Where the fiscal responsibility comes into it is on the top level. If I'm flying around in a jet airplane as a governor, you know, how can I justify holding jobs back from the state level when I'm doing it out of convenience, just strictly convenience, nothing else? I'll drive, take a charter flight, or I'll take what probably will become the Endow aid program for flights. So, you know, it's one of those things that we got to think fiscally. I could go on with the many different areas on the top part of it, and it's very important that we note that and actually do it. Another example is I will be far outspent on this campaign. I could spend a lot more money. I'm a millionaire. I could spend a lot of money. But to do that is hypocritical if you're going to be fiscally responsible, in my opinion. If you're going to spend millions on the campaign, try to buy the job, what are you going to do when you get to be governor?
Mr. Dahlin, what do you plan to do with current Governor Mead's Endow initiative? Is it important to you, and if so, why? If not, why not?
Well, I touched on it just a little bit ago. Let's go back and look at its predecessor. Its predecessor is the Wyoming Business Council. That was started 20 years ago. 20 years ago it was started for one reason, one specific reason, to diversify the economy of Wyoming. Now, after about $1 billion of expense, we are in the exact same spot when they started that government entity 20 years ago. That's a government entity set out to do something that the private sector should be doing. Endow is just another $42 million layer on top of that, and both those need to go away. I'm sorry, but they just need to go away because they didn't get the job done. If one doesn't do the job, why are you just going to double down on a loss because they didn't get the job done? In business, you don't do that. In business, you got to make corrections and make total reorganizations and changes. You don't double down on the loser. And, you know, there's good people there. They just don't have goals. If you're going to have a goal to diversify the economy, we're 70% dependent today. Tomorrow we ought to be 69%. That's the way it's supposed to work. Their goal simply was, here's some money, go diversify the economy. That money needs to go on the local level, if anywhere, to the towns and rural areas where they know what they need, and they can work on their own issues and challenges and leave the state government out of it unless they need some assistance and direction, and we'll go out there and help them. But you put too much stuff on the top part is not the way things work. Everything works from the bottom where everything starts. All my businesses started from either a credit line, zero, or whatever. It started down here. They didn't end up in the multi-million-dollar level and then go up from there. It's just not the way it works. It's on the local level, and we got to take that into mind with the Wyoming Business Council and Dow. They just didn't get it done. They're good people, but that needs to change and be completely revamped.
Some experts believe it's not possible to successfully diversify the state's economy without changing its tax structure. Do you agree with that? And if so, what changes would you propose?
I think that concept that you just read is a joke, and I'll tell you why it's a joke. Because we've never been diversified. We're not diversified. And to change our tax structure thinking that someday we might be diversified is a joke. And if you looked at the REMI study and you read it, it said in there, if we become diversified. And they used a comparison of 100 chemical manufacturing jobs. That's all they used in the comparison that it would be detrimental if we diversified for that small segment. So that study doesn't hold water, for starters. Now, this is my position. If we get diversified, which I think, using an example as industrial hemp, we diversify into that area just as an example to bring it forth and open the door to a lot of other areas. The government's job is not to run them. Open the door, take down the tripping wires, and let people take off with what they think they can do. So in the case where you're going to start taxing them before you ever have anything going, to change the tax structure is backwards. Let's get going. If it gets diversified and things need adjustment down the road, and we need to look at it and we need to talk about it, let's do it then. But if you start raising taxes before the horse ever gets out of the gate, you're in trouble.
How would you help guarantee stability and funding for local governments, cities, towns, and counties?
You're going to think I'm a broken record. But I just read an article that my daughter sent to me, how industrial hemp, it's actually starting in North Dakota. They're growing it there on the research program. They're growing it in Montana. And there was even an article in your newspaper that you had here last month about Oregon knocking down marijuana and growing industrial hemp with the thought of $100,000 an acre versus the loser of marijuana. So even in your known newspaper, you brought it up. So in rural areas, you've got all those components. You got transportation, you have logistics, okay, you've got manufacturing, and you've got agriculture, all in one plant, and it can grow in Wyoming. And I tell you, we import about $1 billion worth of that product now, and it's going to double in the next 2 to 5 years. And if we think that just to start thinking differently, because that's coming. I mean, if you look around your stores and everything, you'll find that product everywhere, and it's starting to take over a lot of other things as far as products go. That's just one example. There's many examples, but I can use that as a tangible example, which nobody else has any specifics on how we're going to kickstart diversity. They'll give you general terms. They'll say, we need to do this and we need to do that. I'm a business guy, not a politician. I'm a business guy. I need to sink my teeth into something, and if we don't start sinking our teeth into something, we're going to be in trouble.
Mr. Dahlin, as you indicate, you have a history in coal, so the next question is about coal. Recent reports indicate fewer U.S. utilities are using coal for power generation due to the abundance of natural gas and renewables. With this decline in coal's domestic use, do you support the continued investment in the coal industry and new technology?
I think coal has a definite place in our industry, in our state. I'll tell you why. We went from selling 600 million tons of coal a few years ago. Now we're down to about 300 million. Now, regulations did have a little bit of a factor on that when the Obama administration was there, but fortunately, President Trump came and he removed those restrictions. But the mentality still exists that the coal is going to be challenged regardless of those regulations being knocked down. So the demand and the pricing are extremely important to coal, and coal, I buy it, and it's not real expensive, but by the time you add all the components of transportation and everything to get it to the customer, then it becomes more of a high-priced commodity. It's not the originational price, it's the transportation, everything else involved. Natural gas has been coal's nemesis for a long time. This just hasn't been one of these new things that came out. That industry's been growing for some time, and now there's such a super abundance of it, they're starting to export it. It's becoming a big export into liquid gas, even going to China and different places. So it's going to be around as a competitor, and that's a free market, and there's nothing as a governor is going to be able to do to stop the free market, even though it'd be nice to go out and tell everybody that, hey, I'll revive coal, I'll save the day. Well, the railroads aren't going to build unless you got something at the end of the line, number one. And number two is they're not going to dig more coal unless they got a demand for it. And so the free market's got to do its thing. As far as the wind and renewable energy, that horse is out of the barn. That technology is coming at us. It's been subsidized, which may have been a mistake, but shortly that's not going to be an issue anymore because we'll be able to compete on our own. Coal will still have a market because there's places for it, and we need to defend it.
Kind of segues right into the next question, which is about where you stand on regulating and taxing renewable energy production, such as wind and solar.
Well, I think we ought to consider renewables and that type of energy on the same playing fields we do with our legacy energy. I mean, if we're going to tax coal and we're not going to tax renewable energy, that doesn't seem fair to me. I mean, it just doesn't seem to have the same balance to it. So they need to compete on the same playing field, in my opinion.
Do you think the existing wind tax is sufficient, or would you advocate increasing it?
Well, you know, I got to be 100% honest with you. I do. I mean, I think we should give that serious consideration after they put the 1,000 wind turbines in the Red Desert. And after they're built. And I'm just being honest with you. Because if you start raising taxes right now, and it looks like that they can change directions, and then I think they need some comfort level that they're going to be able to sustain their business as well, because that'll be charged downstream once the taxes hit, and it eventually hits us. So we got to be careful with that. But I think let's let that industry build up somewhat before we get too excited.
What are your thoughts on climate change, and as governor, what are your plans to address it in Wyoming?
Well, you know, I'm not one to go back and forth on that topic. I do think we got to be stewards of our environment. I think it's extremely important that we're good stewards of our environment. If we're not, that's not the proper way to address things. So we need to evaluate it as we go. I mean, we can get into long diatribe about it is or it exists or it doesn't exist, but I think overall the big emphasis should be on our environment and be cognizant of it. If we're going to make a mistake, let's err on the side of having a better environment.
As governor, how would you address education funding challenges that the state faces right now?
Always comes down to funding, doesn't it? I was just looking on your wall in there while we're waiting on this meeting back in 1989. This was a discussion then too. The discussion of educational funding has been on the forefront off and on since the history of this state. I think it would be important for us to be creative and innovative in our education system. I think it's important that we acknowledge that the teachers are in charge of our most valuable resource, and the emphasis should be on the teachers, not on the districts. We have a lot of districts out there, and maybe they have reasons for having 8 districts in Fremont County versus having 3 in Sheridan and 1 in Natrona. Maybe there's reasonings for it, but I think we should always evolve and look at our system to make it the most efficient while protecting our most valuable resource, that's our children. So funding is an issue. It's always been an issue, and we need to protect our children, and the teachers are the first ones we need to focus on as far as I'm concerned.
So just to be clear, are you advocating consolidating some districts in the state? Or?
I would be open to it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the only one saying that. I mean, I've been to school. I've went to a lot of schools, administrators I've met, principals I've met. I've got friends that are principals and teachers. I mean, that's not only me saying this. It's always about our professional educators are talking about it. If you have an opportunity, there's no reason why not to try it. I mean, you could always go back and put another district in if it didn't work out. I mean, everybody thinks things are stuck in concrete, but they aren't. We can be flexible and get things done.
Mr. Dahlin, how big of a priority would it be for you to improve broadband internet access across the state? And if it's important, how would you as governor make it happen?
I can relate best to that question simply saying this as a businessman. We can go back a little bit on the education system too, because there are some so-called business people that say that we need to educate people and for the workforce, now available workforce. There are people that say we need to build broadband so businesses will come to us. I've never hired one single employee ever before they had a job to go to. So this to me is just smoke and mirrors. It's a bunch of hooey as far as I'm concerned, that you're going to go educate people and you're going to have, but if you don't have anything waiting for them, they're not going to stick around. If you build broadband and somebody at a ranch house out west of here has faster internet service than Hughes, but nobody comes out there to build a business out there, they already have internet service. So you compare light bulbs and everything else, when we had no electricity or we did have electricity, that's not the same thing. We need to cooperate with businesses, private sector, and get a commitment from them. These business people say that they need these people, that they need them, and we'll educate them. Then let's make the private sector commit to hiring them. And if they don't hire them, and then we're wasting money. And if we build broadband, let's talk to businesses that will use it. And if they're not going to use it, nobody commits to it, should we spend that money? I'd be a little reluctant to do that. I think the private market will drive itself if we open up the doors. And all these businesses have internal marketing groups. And I would devote my time in working with the people to talk to these different corporations, which I've dealt with a lot of corporations, and ask them what they need, not have the government just come in and spend money.
How would you address challenges related to providing health care to all Wyoming residents?
That's a big challenge, and health care is very important. Mental health care, private health care, Medicaid. We have the worst suicide rate of any state. It's deplorable. It's embarrassing. We should attack our mental health issues, number one, so we can relieve that situation. We need to adopt a competitive market for our healthcare system. And some people say, well, that's not going to help. It'll drive costs up, and competition is not going to be the best thing for us. We don't have it now. We don't have competition now. And why are we afraid to try it? If it's something that doesn't work, we can always go back and try something else. Our economy, our lives are continually evolving. Our needs are continually evolving. We can't be afraid to try things and think differently. And I think having competition certainly is a good start in the health sector. Also, different forms of health. You take the rural needs. We need to look at possibly better actual virtual technology for medicine in rural areas. We need to look at different things all the way across the board and just think differently about our healthcare as we do everything else.
Mr. Dahlin, if a marijuana legalization bill passed the legislature and landed on your desk, would you sign it, and why or why not?
Medical marijuana is a resource that I've had personal experience with. I had a sister-in-law in Montana that she was on chemo treatment. She took medical marijuana and it brought her out of a death spiral. And there's many stories around this state that medical marijuana has helped people. We have the biggest per capita fibromyalgia disease in the state of Wyoming, and the conventional drugs do not work well on that. They're expensive, and medical marijuana works on that particular disease in a very effective way. Who are we as the government to deny the people of Wyoming? Who are we to deny them relief? Who are we? Just because we think we know better? I definitely would support medical marijuana if it came to my desk.
What about full legalization?
You know, I'd have to ponder on that a little bit. I think we better walk before we run. And, you know, there's been challenges in the existing states across the line. You know, I don't have a mental block about it. I really don't. But I think let's discuss that in a different setting, in a longer, more intelligent process before we go that way. I think medical marijuana has proven itself a little bit, and that's got a little more control to it. And I think it's important that we, you know, we have enough information on medical marijuana that I think we can move forward with that. Recreational, let's talk about that in a different way, but I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to talking about it.
What do you think of the current way liquor sales are handled in Wyoming, and if you think it needs to change, how so?
You know, I hear we compare ourselves to Montana, and I've talked to bar owners, and they like Wyoming compared to Montana. So, you know, it depends where you're at and where you come from, because she used to have a store in Montana, partially moved into Wyoming across the border so she could have a better system than what Montana had. I think we could always improve on our process of our liquor distribution and what we have. I'd be wide open to any new ideas, and I'd be wide open to anything and trying it if we really thought it was going to be beneficial to change the system. Definitely be wide open. We got to have an open mind and be able to say, let's try it. If it works out, let's move forward with things if it's beneficial to the state of Wyoming.
How important is providing commercial air service to Wyoming communities to you, and if it's important, how would you make it happen?
I think we've tried it before, haven't we? We've had flight assisted, we've had government assisted flights in the state of Wyoming before. And there again, you're spending money without having an end to why you're spending the money. Is it because they will come? Or is it just because it's convenient? It's not like Alaska, where you don't have roads. We do have roads, but if you start spending money on these things, you're pulling away from other resources that we're limited on until our economy becomes diversified and we strengthen our economy. You're pulling away funds from other needs for convenience. And if we don't realize what needs are versus convenience, we'll be in trouble. So I'm not all hopped up on it, and particularly with the Endow program on it. You know, I mentioned that I would drive, I would take chartered flights if need be, or take the Endow supplemented flights. But I don't see that being a winner. I just see that as money going down a hole until we have a business that comes in and says, I'm going to move my headquarters here because you have air service. And then we hold them accountable for that. And then let's work together and see what we can do. But if you don't have a reason to go there and subsidize that flight, in my feeling as a businessman, you're wasting money unless you got an end goal, not just to have a flight.
Mr. Dahlin, what's your position on gun control measures to protect citizens in public venues? Do you believe locations like the University of Wyoming and large events like Cheyenne Frontier Days have the right to impose rules limiting a citizen's right to carry a loaded firearm?
Well, I believe in the Constitution. Unless we change the Constitution, you know, maybe we'll change our First Amendment then. Maybe we ought to change our Second Amendment. Maybe we ought to start changing them all. So if you start with the Second Amendment and you dilute that, I don't think that works. I think the rest of the amendments in the Constitution then become weaker. So I defend the Second Amendment, definitely. I think there's some checks and balances that we could definitely consider. I think training is important. If a person's never handled a gun before, it would be important for them to know how to use a gun. But I believe in the Second Amendment.
What's your position on the transfer of federal lands to the state and the management of those lands?
Well, let's look at the reality. That would be a long, contested battle with a dubious ending in the Supreme Court that I don't think we need to be taking it on. I think we're fine. I've never camped out on state land. And if anything, we need to find better access to state land because we don't have multi-use and of state land. And how are we going to go ahead and take federal land over and then be more restrictive on the federal land, like the state is more restrictive than the federal land is right now? So I don't buy it. I don't want the transfer. I think if anything, we can look at things as we go, but as it stands right now, they might tell you, well, we'll have more access to coal if we do that without paying the federal government for it, or we'll have more access to oil. Well, if the demand's there and we deplete the rest of it around there, we can maybe look at some things, but we're so far from that. We already get about $1 billion of that money from the federal government of everything that's done on there now that's just given to us for very little effort. Utah tried it. They benched it. It's a Western lands issue. I'm fine with just leaving it the way it is.
If elected, how do you plan to work with and communicate with the press, legislators, and citizens?
Well, since I won't have a jet airplane to fly around in, I'll be driving more, and I'll be stopping in to see all the constituents out here, and I'll have an open door policy. I think it's ridiculous. If I ran my business and I didn't have constituents, if my employees didn't have access to me, and I'm trying to run a business, that's counterintuitive. It's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. We've got to work together. It's not about me. It's about all of us together. So I'll be very open. I'll have an open door policy. I'll be going to towns and driving through them. Since I won't have a jet airplane, I might just have to stay overnight every now and then, for the timing of it. So it's very important that we all work together and we all talk together and we're all open. That includes the press, and that includes everybody out there in the state.
What about with the legislature?
Legislature is extremely important. They are the equal branch of the government. If we can't work together, we're in trouble, and that's going to impede the progress of this state. We've got to work together.
What other topics or issues have we not covered today that you would like to address?
Well, I think the most important one, that is, I'd like to ask for your vote. And the vote being August 21st. Prior to that, you can write in July 6th, starting at that point, write in. It's important that it's very important that you vote, and you take into consideration all the points of all the candidates. And I think if once you shake it down, you're going to find that I'll be the one that works with you, that we all work together to actually do something that's never been done before, because we have some great people in this state, fantastic people. And in this state, there's nothing we can't accomplish if we work together. If we work together, we can do anything. So I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Let's turn to Katie and see what our Facebook Live audience has in terms of questions for you.
Great. And all of you out there, thank you for watching. Please continue to comment with any questions that you may have. The first question comes from Diana Fales, and she would like to know if you have a message for any newer voters.
I definitely do. That's the future. That's the future of this state. The newer voters, younger voters, they've got to get in the game. They've got to get in the game because that's going to they're going to pick candidates that align with their thinking, and that's the way we progress as a government. Less government is better, but it still has a major role. So definitely extremely important that they get involved.
Right. Do any of you have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Jim Weaver. I just have a question about NDOW and the Business Council. You stated that you see them as somewhat antiquated. Do you have a plan on getting from what is there today to something in the future with that block of money, that infrastructure that's there?
I do. That's where the legislation and myself would work together. Their goal is to diversify the economy, so we have to recognize, are they doing that with those resources? Have they done it? Are they doing it? And if they haven't done it and they're not doing it, because it's an easy revenue source to measure. If we've got other revenue sources coming in, it's going to show up. And we haven't got it, and we're not doing it. So I think, just from my feeling about it, the people of the communities and the municipalities in some format, that they get those resources to work on their own communities directly, not having the state tell them how they should be running their towns.
Thank you.
Bob?
I have a couple. So I would like to go back to the industrial hemp. What would you do day one to start the state's movement into industrial hemp? Why is that not being done now? What would you do to fix that?
Industrial hemp has a stigmatism connected to marijuana. It looks like it, and consequently people confuse it, and it's not. And that education process has to be taken on immediately. Even though I'm in favor of medical marijuana, that's a different venue how we're going to go after that. But industrial hemp is something that is being tested in the United States right now. We have a bill in 2000, it's House Bill 230, that passed it in the state, and it's ready to go forward. Our ag director here at the state was given a letter from Governor Meade to say to proceed in the most restrict possible manner. In other words, kind of roadblock it. He didn't sign the bill. And so I would go in there and I would tell the ag director, let's get this thing rolling. Let's get it going, open up the doors. If we got any tripping wires, let's get them out of the way, because there's ranchers, farmers, and just your ordinary people ready to go with this out there. It just takes regular farm equipment, and it's drought resistant. It's something that we've got some regulations on right now, but those aren't huge. They're not detrimental if you read the 2014 Farm Bill. So consequently, it's just one of these things that just needs to open the door and get it going. That's really what it's all about. Because we've got, the state says they need $300,000 for testing equipment, and they can't get that appropriated. That's hogwash. As a business guy, when I didn't have money for equipment, I leased it. Or you make a deal with that equipment supplier, and you move forward if you see that there's a reason to do that, and we have a reason to do that.
Sir, you also mentioned that you will probably be outspent in the campaign, but a lot of times that spending dollar helps reach additional people within the state. So how would you how do you think you're going to reach some of those people that your competitors are going to reach because they're willing to spend that extra money?
Well, social media, fortunately, is not an expensive tool to reach those people. And our campaign has been using social media, and thanks to this interview here, that helps. So not turning down any free interviews is a start, and try to reach everybody. And you know, the way that it dawns on me, and I think people, if they're not, they should be more engaged in the political process. I'm not a politician, but I'm engaged in the political environment by choice. And what needs to take place is very important. People need to look at their candidates and make an informed decision, not by yard signs, not by commercials, not by sound bites, but actually take a look at them and do some research and make their decisions. And if they do that, I think we're going to fare pretty well without spending as much money as all the rest of them. Sam Gallios and Foster Freeze, Mark Gordon, all of them are going to be spending millions and millions trying to outdo each other out there, trying to get as many yard signs up and get as many people hired as they possibly can. I get where you're coming from, and that gets people's attention, but does that actually tell them who these people really are?
This question has come up before, but as a business person, so you've mentioned and you know the importance of our small communities and business diversification. Right now we have groups on both sides for and against the Immigration Detention Center. Where do you stand on that?
You know, I was down in Evanston not too long ago, and you're right. There's two ways to look at it. The way I look at it is, first of all, it's being set up because there's a need. They're looking at it to do it because there's a need, and the need is there because there's illegal activity in the immigration process. You know, there's people coming across that aren't legal when they do that, and we need to have laws to take care of that. I've been to naturalization process, and if you've ever been to one, I don't know if you guys have ever been to a naturalization process, it is heartfelt, heartwarming. The people that go through that seem to be have more pride for America than anybody else sitting in there. We need to speed that process up. We need to speed the naturalization process up so we get people coming into this country in a legal way, and that needs to definitely speed up. In the meantime, we need to follow the laws that we have, and the center that's proposed to go down in Evanston is competing for several other locations. That's a free enterprise. That's a free enterprise, and I'm okay with free enterprise. And if it fits the need, it fits the need. And that's where, we just can't have illegal immigration taking place. But the legal process needs to speed up.
Thank you.
Other questions from the online audience?
No, but I had a follow-up on your suggestion for healthcare. I guess your proposal was to adopt a competitive market. I'm just curious how exactly you would do that, by maybe recruiting more health companies, building new hospitals. I don't know, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is I would work with other states, adjoining states, other states, to see if we couldn't establish some sort of pool that would pool all the states. We're a pretty sparse state to start with. So if we could pool our states together and work in a process that would bring in competition into rural areas, versus having Blue Cross Blue Shield be our only internal carrier and have a monopoly, would be beneficial.
So specifically about health insurance, not so much the healthcare providers. Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, well, that helps too, because I think the healthcare providers and also for people that need it would be able to afford health care that maybe they can't afford now.
There was one other question that we've had from previous online audiences, and that's about recruiting young people to come to Wyoming or to stay in the state. What are your thoughts about what you would do as governor to try to help that?
Well, we need to have an environment that is conducive for young people, for starters. I actually think if we open the door to industrial hemp as an opportunity for young entrepreneurs to come into our state, they'll do that. They're doing that in different areas where they have industrial hemp, that they're starting to do it now, just based on the money involved in it. If you got $100,000 an acre, it's not going to take too many acres for you to get by. So, and we need to do creative things like that for young people. You just can't say, I'll provide you with the best education and not have something for them to do when they walk out the door with their square hat on. It's not going to work.
Any other questions? I think we're all set, and I don't need to say too much about when the election is. I think you already said that. That's coming up Tuesday, August 21st, and absentee voting starts a week from tomorrow. For our online audience, thank you for participating and for watching, and we'll have this interview archived and other information, including the announcement story, Mr. Dahlin, when you announce is on our website at wyomingnews.com. Thanks for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys for having me.